Had the police ever had to come to your house? I came home from work one day and there was a cop at my door. I asked him, "What's going on?" He said there were reports of my dogs chasing people on bikes. I told him that was impossible, my dogs can't ride bike. Runaway dog got brought home by the cops, twice. And being a Canadian from a rural area, I would use the cops as free cabs all the time when I was younger. "Excuse me officer, I'm drunk, can get a hold of a cab, and don't want to drive drunk. Can you give me a ride?" "You know kid, we're not a fucking cab service, where do you live?" About for clicks up the road hopping worked like a charm. Recently, as in last weekend, I came home mid-afternoon to a few cop cars and big armored vehicle parked outside my house. Walk up to the detective at the door knowing I haven't done anything wrong and ask what they're doing. Apparently my neighbor behind my house and across the alley was wanted for robbing a couple banks a few years ago, so they wanted to use my backyard to stage their surprise entrance on her house. It was kind of fun to watch, to be honest, and they were really nice and cool about everything. They were here 2 weeks ago. My teenage son dropped his wallet in town and some rather nice person handed it in. The cop went to the library to get his address of the card and brought it out to the house. We weren't in, so he left a card, then offered to come back out to the house with it. Since I thought enough time had been spent on it, I refused his offer and went to the station to pick it up. My neighbor once called the cops on me because they thought I was selling drugs. I live in a very nice area, have a few nice cars, but work from home as a financial consultant, so I have clients coming and going from my house a lot. I on the other hand hardly leave, which I guess led the neighborhood to think I'm a drug dealer. Edit. Spelling. I probably would too, wouldn't call the cops on you though. As long as you're not shooting at people or blasting music at 3 a.m, why do they care? Not me, but my sister. She and her boyfriend were renting a house while going to college. Her boyfriend is really big into sustainable agriculture and ways to grow produce quickly and efficiently. He had a small hydroponic system in a walk-in closet. It turns out police in my sister's area use heat imaging to find people growing weed with hydroponic systems. So one day my sister and her boyfriend get a knock on the door and the police ask if they can look around her house. My sister lets them in and they go straight to the closet where they find the biggest damn eggplants they've ever seen. They then thank my sister and leave embarrassed. TLDR, police try to bust my sister for growing weed and instead find eggplant and an embarrassing lack of illegal activity. My parents were on vacation and I got back from college a week early, so naturally my girlfriend came over. The neighbors saw an unfamiliar car in the driveway and called the cops. I answered the door in my underwear with my girlfriend standing on the stairs half naked. Cop gave me an approving nod and told me to have a good night. All was well in the end. Several times. In college, we had a couple in our apartment complex that used to call the cops for anything. One time, they called the cops because they said it appears they're housing a suspicious person. Nope. Just my Algerian friend from college. I called the police about a woman screaming in the middle of the night somewhere close by. They came quickly and asked me some questions about the event and eventually determined that what I heard were urban foxes mating. While I was living in Georgia, I got a knock on the door on a Saturday morning by a correctional officer with a shotgun out. It turns out he was in charge of the chain gang and asked to use our outside water tap so the prisoners could get a drink. I of course agreed. As the day went on, the heat got worse and the humidity was unbearable. I had some leftover bags of ice and some powdered pink lemonade I took out with some plastic cups and gave them to the officer, which he gave out to the prisoners. They thanked me by trimming some bushes and edged my lawn. My man was getting a splinter out of my little brother's hand when I wax about 4. Being the responsible elder sibling, I decided to call the police and all they heard was a child screaming down the phone with me calling for help. About 5 squad cars turned up 10 minutes later demanding that my ma'am got on the floor and put her hands on her head. This is a story that is brought up at most family get-togethers nowadays. To take my white, middle-class father in for questioning under the Terrorism Act. A pair of peregrine falcons were nesting on a nearby police station, so he decided to sit in his car with a pair of binoculars and watch them for an hour or so while my mum was doing some shopping. Instead of just approaching him, they traced his registration plate and showed up in the early hours of the morning the next day. He's been asked not to do it again unless he goes in and tells the officers in the station first. Yes. Police come over to my house all the time, practically every day. It's gotten so bad that whenever I'm home, there's always an officer around, watching me and waiting for me to mess up. An officer just lets himself into my house, eats my dinners, and tells me what to do. When I stay out too late, an officer calls me and tells me to get back home or else. It's gotten to the point where sometimes an officer has to drive me to school. Well, I guess that's what happens when your dad is a cop. My dad has schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. Imagine an unholy hybrid of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, and you've got it. When I was a young kid, the police were regular visitors, looking for my dad after a rampage, returning him home, checking up on us, etc. It's amazing what you get used to, and I've never been frightened of cops. They always had my back. Family and I were away on vacation, and my uncle stopped by our house to drop something off. He had a key to get in, but not a passcode for the home security system that was very much set. Normally this wouldn't have been an issue, as one phone call from the security company to one of us would have cleared it all up, except we were in mid-flight with our phones turned off. And my uncle already has a criminal record. Alarms went off, cops show up, nobody goes fucking anywhere until they got a hold of us about a half hour later. Thankfully after that it got resolved, but damn, my uncle was shaken. Neighbor didn't care for my motocross track and thought she would come over and show her ass. Not literally, we have no trespassing signs and made sure she was aware. Cops came and threatened to take her to jail for trespassing if she walked back over, since I was breaking no rules by riding. While technically breaking no laws, it is a bit dickish to set up a motocross track in the backyard. Them things is loud. I had a sheriff show up at my door once looking for a former resident. He said without skipping a beat as I opened the door, and I shit you not, I'm looking for beep beep underscore underscore, and you're not him, so I'll let you get back to whatever you were doing. Oh yes. Back in 1991 when we lived in a shithole basement flat with no phone. My husband fell asleep on the last train home from work and ended up in the middle of nowhere, Bridgend actually. He left the station to find the nearest police station to see if they could get a message to me. Then he spent a very long cold night on the station platform. It was February. Meantime the police appeared on my doorstep at 12:30 in the morning to tell me my husband was a twat. Safe, but still a twat. I had a neighbor who absolutely hated us. We were three 21-year-olds and had just purchased the condo. Well, the neighbor proceeded to call the cops on us every other day. About the third time the police came, it was just us three watching cops. Yep, the cops showed up while we were watching cops. They got a good chuckle out of that. After a few weeks of coming out and now knowing all the different cops on a first-name basis, they finally went to the neighbors and asked the neighbors to stop wasting their time. Twice when I lived in my previous apartment. 1, my car matched the description of a vehicle involved in a hit and run. They just wanted to take a look to see if it had any damage. 2, we asked them to come when a drunk college girl was walking into random apartments, peed on our steps, and, when she didn't recognize anyone in any of the apartments she walked into, remained standing and shivering near our dumpster in sub-freezing temperatures with no winter coat on. Edit, cars don't match my description. I am human. A neighbor girl was raising money for DARE, and so my mom wrote her a check for $5. It was the 90s. A few days later, an officer shows up at our door because the check was written as $15 in numbers, but $5 was written out in words. Apparently the neighbor girl changed the check from $5 to $15 to try to raise a little more money. Brilliant. During a snowstorm, my wife, and her cousin were at a party at a friend's place, under 1 kilometer from home. Police showed up around 2 a.m. due to noise complaint. Party quieted down, but that was our cue to leave. Started getting ready to walk home and the officer gave the old "you aren't driving tonight, are you?" line. No sir, just live down the road. He decided we were too drunk to walk in a storm and offered to give us a lift. We gratefully accepted. We pulled into the driveway and I said something to the effect of, "Great, now the neighbors will gossip about us being brought home in a cop car." Cop grins and says, "You want the lights?" Me, fuck yeah. He lit up the blue and reds and hit the siren for a sec just for good measure. Edit, typo. My neighbor got super drunk and started pulling out his guns, threatening to shoot his wife, etc. Cops got called, SWAT team came, cops come to my house to ask us to leave for a while because bullets can go through your walls. No shots were fired. The situation resolved itself when he, in a wife beater and boxer shorts, walked onto his front porch with a bottle of Jack and a .357 yelling, "You'll never take me alive." The cops tackled him. A month later, him and his wife moved to Florida. A couple I was living with was going through a messy divorce at the end of it. One moved out but got enraged and tried to break in, slamming the glass doors, etc. It was scary. The other called the cops, so they showed up a few minutes after he got there, broke it up, was sad. They're good friends and I love them to death. I never saw that coming. Yeah, had to shut down a party I had once. They found one of my dumbest friends passed out on my side yard in his own vomit and they called the paramedics for him. Super overdramatic in every way possible. To make it worse, some stupid guy drove his car into a fence, leaving my party drunk. I never got in trouble for that, thankfully. The lesson is for the people reading this and living in suburbia: don't let parties bleed outside and don't leave your music volume accessible to anyone. I'm sure it was overplayed as if you were selling drugs to 7-year-olds and shit, but when somebody drives through a fence it kinda sounds out of control, lol. Oh yeah. Noise complaints galore in my college days. Had my house broken into once, they came for that. Moved into a townhome a few years back and we had a party with a bunch of people out front. Local PD rolled through, saw us, got out and were all, "Hey guys, just a heads up, we haven't gotten any complaints yet, but the neighbors here aren't chill at all, so rage on all you want, but if we get called out tonight, be cool about it." On several occasions police have come to where I was staying. First, grandma's house, little cousin picked up a phone and dialed 911, they came to make sure everything was okay. Second, friend's house, we had been prank calling our friend and his dad called the cops on us. Third, my house, brother got jumped. Officer came to do follow-up questions. My brother told me that if I called and hung up right away, they wouldn't actually receive the call. I, being a curious 10-year-old girl, decided to give it a try. A few minutes later they showed up. Got a call at 3 a.m. from the police saying there was a break-in, but nothing was taken. Come back to the house to find our cat, that we put in the basement when we left, at the top of the stairs near the entrance to the house. Nothing was taken or broken. Only explanation is the cat opened the door. Set off the motion detector. The police probably came and scared the crap out of our cat. TLDR, put cat in basement before going on vacation. Cat opened door like a velociraptor. Set off motion detector. Police came and scared crap out of the cat. When I was living in Phoenix, our neighbors would constantly call the cops on us if my dad was out working on our cars. It'd always be the same: make sure my father wasn't dumping shit down the drain and knew what he was doing. Then tip their hat and wish us a good day. One time the door got opened slightly by a gust of wind and our door got opened slightly. I got home from dinner and went to take the garbage can back behind the house, and as I was coming back in the pitch black, someone shone a flashlight at me. I kinda freaked out thinking it was one of my buddies from the neighborhood and yelled at them to stop with the light cause I couldn't see. It turns out that the door opening that much set off our security system and they were coming to investigate. So yeah, I yelled at a cop. Some kids at school said I was a drug dealer, which I'm not. Anyways, the stakeout wasn't so subtle as they had 3 Jeeps with cops in them just watching me and taking pictures every time I went outside. Right after the 9th of November, my parents went to Mexico. My dad gave this whole speech about what we should do if they were to die. I was a freshman in high school and my 2 older sisters were in charge. Well, apparently he tried calling the house and we didn't hear the phone and we're watching a movie. So he sent the cops to check on us. They showed up at midnight. I honestly thought they were going to say my parents were dead. When I was still living at my parents' house, I came home to the ATF and local police at our house. It was scary. My brother, who had recently turned 18, got involved with some kid down the street. This was over 20 years ago. They were making pipe bombs. My brother thought they were going to bring them to the farm. Apparently, the other kid and his brother were going to steal them. It was a sting operation to nail the older brother. Scary shit. The cop came to my door to ask what was going on. I had been studying and listening to music around half an hour before. Apparently my neighbor decided to call the police and file a noise complaint. I learned my lesson though. After that semester I never studied for school again. I graduated. The police came to my house because, when my friend and I were working on a presentation for school, he decided to prank call some people. Innocent enough, right? Wrong. I gave him a girl's phone number who we were both friends with, and he left a message saying he was going to blow up her high school. That wasn't a very funny prank, man. When I was around 16-17, I had detectives come to my house to question and accuse me of vandalism in nearby neighborhoods, and they brought a security video of me as evidence. So I had no idea what they were talking about, but I watched the security footage that showed teens vandalizing a person's house. You couldn't see faces, but you could see the vehicle, which they said was mine. The vehicle in the video was a brand new Chevy white truck, and you could see it was clearly a truck. Problem is, I had a white Chevy SUV. But they insisted it was my car. We ended up having an argument about my SUV having a truck bed, which it didn't, of course. They finally left, but still accusing me and telling me I would be hearing from them soon. Never heard back, lol. Cops came to my house at 1 o'clock in the morning. I was asleep upstairs, but my mom came and woke me up, claiming an officer wanted to talk with me. I sat in my bed while he came in and asked me about my friend who had disappeared. I later found out she spent the night at her so's house without telling her parents. I had been known to hang out with her despite her parents not liking me, so they often suspected I was the culprit if she wasn't easily found. The best part was, the officer informed me that keeping any information about him would have a felony charge. I didn't know anything, and he soon left. TLDR, my friend stays the night at her boyfriend's house without telling her parents, and they call the cops thinking I am harboring her. Graffitied a popular bridge for vandalism with some other friends. A few days later, I hear a knock at the door. And somehow, I already knew it was a cop before I looked to see who was there. He asked my mom if I lived here, she says yes, calls me to the door. Wanna know how they found out it was me? I used my YouTube username. I had a few videos on there of myself doing and saying things that I thought were funny at the time. They may have been funny to 13-year-old me, but to a cop they were definitely weird. Thankfully, I've since deleted that account and all traces of the videos are gone. Got home from work with a police car in front of my house waiting to tell me my daughter had been hit by a truck while riding her bike home from school. That was not a good day, nor couple weeks after, but thankfully she's okay now. But now I dread seeing police cars, harbingers of doom. So I'm rolling up in my living room and I see a cop pull up and start walking up to my door, so I freak out, hide the weed and run outside and say, "Hey officer, is everything alright?" He says, "Can I see some ID?" Sir, so I'm like, "Yeah fine, whatever, I didn't do anything, now I'm going to get my I.D. and I can't find my wallet," and the cop sees me frantically searching my pockets. He gives a brief chuckle and says, "I believe this is yours." Turns out he found it at the gas station. They were looking for my neighbors, had the wrong door, fucking duplex. Long version, late at night, loud knocking on the door. Man friend is out like a light, and I'm not answering the door at this hour. Then I hear, "Police, open up." I go to the door, looking freaked, and he starts asking me if everything is okay, while peering over my head to see inside the apartment. I tell him everything is fine, and he gives me the skeptical, "Are you sure?" When I insist everything is okay, he tells me they got a call about a domestic dispute complete with a knife being pulled. I point him to the other door, where our scumbag neighbors live. They hadn't even been here for 2 months before this shit happened. They're still loud and generally shitty, but the cops haven't been here since. Roommates came home drunk after 2 a.m. and left before 5 a.m. The neighbors saw the sliding glass door wide open and phoned in a possible robbery. 2 officers walked in and loudly identified themselves and asked anyone inside the house to identify themselves as well. Talk about being scared shitless from a deep sleep. I slowed exited my room to see them with guns drawn but pointing down. They walked the house with me, nothing was stolen, and left. My friend and I were moving into a new house. We had the lease and keys, just hadn't moved in yet. We go in the house one day to check it out, plan stuff, whatever, and suddenly there's knocking and, "Police. Open up." From outside. 2 cops at the back door with guns drawn. I opened the door, hands up, answered questions about what we were doing there. Turned out some neighbors saw us entering the house and assumed we were robbers. They came over and apologized. Now I have this cool story about how a cop pointed a gun at me for going in my new house, ha ha. Before I was born, my neighbor's aunt and uncle got busted for growing weed. Since they were neighbors and relatives, the cops assumed my parents were in on it and asked to search the place. Didn't find shit except for a catnip plant in the kitchen window, but why did that officer think he'd found something when he saw that across the room? The officer ended up getting into a brief argument with my dad over whether it was catnip or marijuana. Meanwhile, the cat was climbing up the guy's leg trying to get to the catnip he held in his hands. One of my parents' best stories from before I was born. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.